nerds, what's up? I thought it would be kind of fun today to do a first Song of Ice and Fire read through ranking video. So ranking the order of the books that I like, my top 5 characters, and top 10 quotes. Now, I expect these to change a lot as I reread the series, obviously, but I want to capture this moment in time. So without further ado, we are going to start with ranking the 5 published Song of Ice and Fire books. So I obviously want to talk about how the series of Song of Ice and Fire has been incredibly influential in fantasy, but I think a lot of people, even more so than the first book, find A Storm of Swords to be the book that has influenced fantasy more than any other modern book. It is often widely considered one of the best fantasy books ever written, and a lot about its pacing and elements have tried to be replicated over and over again. In fact, I even did a recent video about learning the wrong lessons, and in part of that I talk about the Red Wedding in particular, which I think is a scene in fantasy that has been referenced numerous times and has tried to be captured. Obviously, A Storm of Swords is one of the most influential and perhaps objectively best written A Song of Ice and Fire book. All of that to say, my favorite and in the first slot of all of the books is A Feast for Crows. So here's the thing. Yes, A Feast for Crows is my number one. I had to say that stuff first because I understand that this is a subjective pick, and that's okay because this is my list and I can do whatever I want. A Feast for Crows is my favorite. I read it the fastest. I was hooked the very most. It is just a stunning piece of character work, in my opinion. Every viewpoint needed to be there. It had some of my favorite viewpoints. I think it is the book where, even though I already really loved Jaime in A Storm of Swords, Feast is what really made me understand him even deeper as a character. Obviously, it had a ton of Brienne in it, and Sansa and Arya, characters I really, really like. Overall, I think Feast is stunning, and I just cannot believe so many people thought I wasn't going to like it. I wouldn't change a thing. It's also why I'm not planning for my reread to read the combined version of Dance and Feast, because I think Feast is such a good book. Feast is just the book that's for me, okay? It doesn't have to be for all of you. I get it, George. I get what you were doing. Feast is subjectively my favorite A Song of Ice and Fire book on this first listen, and I'm standing by it. That does mean number 2, of course, is A Storm of Swords. Objectively, I think this is the best written book, as I said previously. Like, I understand why so many people talk about this book and why it's considered one of the best in fantasy. I do think it's incredibly influential. It's so clear that other authors and even shows and everybody in fantasy has tried to recapture a lot of what George did in that book. And I think it's just really incredible. Even though I think overall Feast made me the most emotional consistently, I had the most visceral reaction to anything I have ever had before in fiction. I said that in my A Storm of Swords review. I have never reacted more intensely than I did at the Red Wedding. And I talked about it a lot in my other video that I just previously mentioned, but it's because of how it's written. It's not just the events that are happening. It's the way George masterfully foreshadows things and sets things up, and the way he is able to write. And I think someone told me, and I did not fact check this, so I am sorry, but that George has written a lot of short fiction before this. And I think that is true, because I know he has several short story collections. And I think his ability to write a short story is something that makes those events like the Red Wedding so successful, because in many ways, I think he uses some of his short story writing ability in that to make it like a self-contained thing. It's why I think his prologues and epilogues are often so good as well. But anyway, yeah, Storm of Swords is number 2. Obviously. My number 3 is A Game of Thrones. And I don't have it to show because I already started rereading it, so it's actually upstairs where I do a lot of my reading. A Game of Thrones is my 3rd. Honestly, I think I'm always going to have a lot of love for the first installment in the series. I think if you're not going to argue that Storm of Swords is the most influential, you're going to argue that A Game of Thrones is the most influential book in fantasy in the modern era, particularly with obviously what happens to Ned Stark. It's just that it's so crazy that I went into that book thinking I'm reading this and I'm probably not going to enjoy it, and to just feel so invested and then so gutted by the ending and just not see it coming at all, and to be taken aback by how good George's writing is, which I just hadn't heard talked a lot. because so much of the conversation revolved around the show or Wins not being finished. And honestly, like nostalgia wise and how I always tend to have a lot of love for the first in a series. So I almost could have even rated this higher, but I think ultimately third is where it is for me. That leaves number 4 to be Clash of Kings. It's always hard with these books. I don't want them to be last because A Clash of Kings is an excellent installment. One thing about Clash is I think it wasn't paced quite as well as a Game of Thrones, but the thematic elements are just so next level with that book. Really is what gets you understanding the setup for the rest of the series. Obviously, it's great. That does leave my number 5 as A Dance with Dragons. I hate putting this last because, well, everyone puts Feast last, so I already got that. I already got that interesting, but I know a lot of people put Dance at the end of their lists, usually in position 4 or 5. I think Dance will be definitely more interesting to me on a reread because I have a feeling that there's a lot of detailed story elements that I might have missed on my first pass. Ultimately, as I talked about in my review, this is the only one that felt a little unwieldy. However, I did give it a 4.5 stars, which is rare for me. All of these books were 4.5 or 5 stars. So I do maintain that, yes, A Dance with Dragons is last, but it is last in the way that all of them are fantastic and they would all beat, I mean, it's May, so I've read a lot of books at this point, and still the 3 Martin books I've read, so Feast, Dance, and Ice Dragon, are all 1, 2, and 3. Their places 1, 2, and 3 on my reading list this year. So yes, Dance is at the end, but it is not any less beloved. It is not forgotten. Okay, that's my ranking. Here, I'll display it again. Tell me, is it controversial? I know spot 1 is, but otherwise I feel like my ranking is probably pretty standard after that. Okay, next I thought it would be fun to do my top 5 characters from my first read through, which was really difficult. Now, if I think a lot of you are new to my channel, but I usually hate actually ranking things against each other because it's really hard. So this is a little bit of a nebulous top 5. I have someone in position 1, and then the other 4 are kind of tied. I don't know exactly how I want to put them. I know that's cheating, but it was already hard enough to narrow it down to 5. So in position 1, the one person I finally had to admit to myself is my favorite character, is just devastatingly Jaime Lannister. I hate that I'm saying that, but it's true. What an arc for me personally. I know a lot of people told me I would love Jaime. I didn't think it was possible. A Storm of Swords made me like Jaime. And now, just when I got to that Jaime chapter in Dance and I was so happy, I was like, oh, you are my favorite character. I don't think there's anything. Why do I love Jaime? I think a big part of why I love Jaime is how you get such a certain picture of who he is in the first 2 books and then have to confront that a lot of what you knew about Jaime was from what other people said happened and not really understanding what was going on and how shocking it can be just hearing from a different perspective how life was different. And it's so interesting as I've started my reread of A Game of Thrones, I'm not very far in, just a little over 100 pages, to already be able to pick up on those subtleties that I didn't the first read through, actions or tone of voice or understanding that, who just said it? I think it was Tyrion actually perspective who said, oh, there's Jaime, he doesn't take anything seriously. And after being in Jaime's head, knowing what a front that is and just seeing that push and pull, oh, it's making the reread so good. Obviously, Jaime's relationship with Brienne and, you know, the way he's trying to fight for honor or see honor later in the book, it's all good. I love it. I don't think I need to explain it. Jaime's my number 1. Okay, these next 4 characters, not in particular order because I don't know the order I want to say them in yet, so maybe I'll come up with it later. The next character in my top 5 I need to talk about, though, is indeed Catelyn Stark. You're just haters. You don't understand the beauty that is Catelyn Stark. I love her representation of motherhood. I love her very conflicted emotions that she has to deal with. First, coming to Winterfell, even this very barren, cold place, and kind of accepting the change that her life took, and even learning and to love and be a partner to Ned. Her, like, yes, Catelyn makes mistakes, but I understand her. I see where she's coming from. And I just loved the nuance that George gave to her. I think she fiercely fights for her children as a mother, but also refuses to be out of the political game. And she makes a lot of mistakes. And that makes me love her more, not hate her. I just think she's such an underrated representation of motherhood and fantasy. I don't have very much else to say. I'll save it for my, sure, very long Catelyn defense video, but mostly I'm really excited when she's on screen, and you'll live forever in my heart, Catelyn. Next up, and this is one that will, like Jaime, not be controversial at all, is Tyrion Lannister. Quite obviously, I am always attracted to a smart character, always on one of my top lists, and Tyrion is just so clever and so smart, but obviously very different than those typical smart characters because he deals with deep insecurity because of how terrible his family has often treated him, and just how clever he is and how he has to deal with kind of that self-loathing constantly, but how the front that he puts on and just how he navigates is so masterful. I think some of George's best writing is often found in Tyrion chapters, particularly dialogue. He just really nails it. It's kind of hard not to love Tyrion. Okay, next up, Brienne. Yes, Brienne of Tarth. I don't think anyone's surprised if you guys have watched my reviews. I just love Brienne. She's, Dunk reincarnated female version. Not quite, but they're similar. I love my honorable characters. Again, I talked about this a lot in my female character video of Martin's, but again, Brienne could just be a very typical character, someone who wants to be a knight, wants to fight like the boys, but instead he deals with Brienne in such a nuanced way where Brienne has all this baggage from her family. She, yes, is very ugly, but instead of owning that, has a deep kind of sadness and shame about perhaps what she could be. I think there's that fantastic quote about what she could or couldn't give her father, and the way that she just tries to defend everyone, and also the way that she's able to go forward without judgment. Like, seeing her and Jaime together in particular, such a good duo. I mean, I remember, I think I said this in my Storm of Swords review, that Jaime is someone who holds everything to his chest. He puts on such a front, and Brienne is the opposite, where nothing is a front. It's just, she lays it all out there. And so to see them come together was really satisfying. It's just great. I love Brienne. And then finally, number 5, well, not number 5, you know what I mean. My last top 5 character is Ned Stark. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I know he's been dead for 4 books, but this is my list and I can do whatever I want. So some people that just missed this top 5 that were really hard to cut out, Davos, my Onion Knight, obviously, Arya Stark. Clearly, she's incredible. She was probably the one who just missed. I really do love reading Arya. Sansa's in there too. Those are probably like the ones who just maybe missed top 5. But yeah, tell me if my list is insane below. And finally, I thought it would be fun to do a top 10 quotes. Now, I do have a little caveat here because a couple of my favorite quotes kind of turned into scenes. Like, one I think of is when Jaime is talking to his aunt in Feast for Crows, one of my favorite scenes, but I was gonna have to read like 6 paragraphs for it to make sense. And that was a lot of scenes I really liked. So I actually tried to keep it to what I would consider a quote, like 1 to 2 sentences, which does leave out some things like the broken man speech, that conversation between Jaime and his aunt, and other scenes like that I felt like needed wider context to like. So just keep that in mind. I might do another video of top scenes later, which is a little different, but here are my top quotes. So let's start with number 10. We're gonna do a backwards order this time, which I haven't done previously, but quote 10, "But never think that means I have forgotten. The North remembers, Lord Davos, the North remembers, and the mummer's farce is almost done." Of course, that is from A Dance with Dragons. The North remembers. What a great tagline. Number 9, we're keeping it simple. winter is coming. So obviously that's from a Game of Thrones and many of the books. And it's a basic quote, but it's famous for a reason in my opinion. Winter is coming, just the way it is used as first a statement of Winterfell, of the way Ned says it and how it continues through the series, and the way it continually builds the dread and doom that is happening in the series, yet is such a simple line, winter is coming. So metaphorical, so thematically appropriate. It's a great line. Sometimes there's a reason lines are famous. Number 8. We had one king, then 5. Now all I see are crows squabbling over the corpse of Westeros. That was said by Lord Roderick in Feast for Crows. And I think if I had to rank them, is my favorite title mention. I love, actually, especially in the later books, how George brings in the titles in such great innovative ways. And this one in particular, I really loved thematically, because when I first heard Feast for Crows, it just, like a Storm of Swords kind of just feels like a random title. But hearing that quote, all I see are crows squabbling over the corpse of Westeros, just so visceral and really describes where characters are in Feast. And number 7. And she thought, no, don't cut my hair. Ned loves my hair. Then steel was at her throat and its bite was red and cold. From obviously A Storm of Swords. This is really on the list for the emotional damage it gave me. That's all. Number 6. When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or die. There is no middle ground. Also from a Game of Thrones, another very classic quote. I am putting it high though because it is classic for a reason. When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or die. What a fire quote. Again, very thematically appropriate for the entire series, and we see variations of that quote come up a lot in the next 5 books, and that's what we're seeing. You live or die. And George put that promise in first book and has kept it. Next up, number 5. 7, Brienne thought again, despairing. She had no chance against 7, she knew. No chance and no choice. She stepped out into the rain, Oathkeeper in hand. From Feast for Crows, self-explanatory. See, this is why I like Feast the most. Feast gave my heart a little bit of a break in some ways, because we get to have like the triumphant moments too. Anyway, Brienne's the best. Okay, and number 4, we've got another dance quote, which is, "So young," said Wyman Manderley, "though mayhaps this was a blessing. Had he lived, he would have grown up to be a Frey." Yes, that's number 4, because that line is such a good burn, and it makes me smile. I can't believe I'm saying this, but enough people... Not a lot of people, but a few people made the comment that it was bad or problematic to like that quote because I was supporting child death. And it's just like, look, I actually don't agree with Manderley at all in how he's going about stuff. Do I like that he cooked people in pies? No, super gross. Not a fan, not supportive. Am I supportive of that quote because I hate the phrase? Yes. That's my right, so I am keeping it here. Number 3, it wasn't Warren, Arya wanted to say. It was me. She had killed Chiswick with a whisper, and she would kill 2 more before she was through. I'm the ghost in Harrenhal, she thought, and that night there was one less name to hate. That's from A Clash of Kings. I had read that in my original read-through. I love that line. I actually just love Arya's whole arc in that book, and her praying for the people she hates every night before bed is just such a good detail, such an iconic detail, and really like how that quote brings it together. Okay, now we're at our top 2. Number 2. He wants me gone, Catelyn thought warily. Kings are not supposed to have mothers, it would seem, and I tell him things he does not want to hear. Might be controversial as number 2. I know that's really high, but again, it really plays into the theme of motherhood that I think George actually writes particularly well. And also it's from Catelyn, who is one of my favorite characters, so no apologies. And finally, number 1. What's my number 1 favorite quote? Here's a hint. It's from my number 1 favorite character. Can you guess what it's gonna be? A dozen quips came to mind, each crueler than the one before, but Jaime only shrugged. I dreamed of you, he said. Best line in the whole series. I won't take any arguments, thank you. Okay, I hope that was a fun walkthrough on my first read-through. I know there were some pretty unpopular opinions or weird takes in this video, but I stand by them as my first read-through. I'd love to hear your top 5 characters, your book ranking. Unless you put Feast last, then I don't want to hear about it. I would like to hear about some of your favorite quotes that I missed. Again, quotes, not scenes. I know that's really hard because there's so many great scenes. Anyway, just tell me in the comments below. And as always, if you like this kind of videos, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I am currently reading, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.